Good evening, everyone. This is the committee public hearing from the Committee of Public Safety of City Council to review resolution number 20052. Mr. Glass, would you please read the title of the resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight we'll be hearing testimony on resolution number 20052, a resolution authorizing the Committee on Public Safety to hold hearings regarding the anti-gun violence movement, #ManUpPHL.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. Can we determine that we have a quorum by taking the roll?
Absolutely. Councilmember Green?
Present.
Councilmember Gaudier?
Present.
Councilmember Gim? Councilmember Brooks? Councilmember Thomas? Vice Chairman Johnson? Chairman Jones?
I'm present. I believe we have a quorum, and so we can get started.
Councilman?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to say that I'm present. I apologize for missing my roll call.
That is quite all right. Better late than never.
Mr. Chairman, if I may take 1 minute.
Yes.
I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of Council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. Anyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to Councilman Jones recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. Before I hear from the author of this resolution, Member Green, I just want to state for the record how grateful we are to Man Up PHL for their initiative and their report that we will hear a great deal of detail about today. As we sit in the city of Philadelphia, we are in a state of crisis, as many of the members of the Public Safety Committee have chronicled in their various activities throughout the year. We have to do what Desmond Tutu said. Stop pulling people out of the river and figure out why people are upstream finding themselves in the river in the first place. I think PHL, Man Up, is that kind of analysis of what is going on in our city, what is the state of mindset of individuals that are most vulnerable to be involved in shootings or be shot. And I want to thank Member Green for bringing this to this committee's attention and focusing on this in a laser-like fashion to make sure that we, in the beginning of the budget process, pay attention to some of the causal effects so that we can create some of the solutions. I do not want us just to focus on the problem, but I want us to be solutionaries and focus on some of the potential solutions, bringing them to scale so that we can change the condition of the city of Philadelphia. And without further ado, I'd like to acknowledge Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you stated, the timing of this hearing is quite impactful, considering that the mayor will be giving his budget address on Thursday. And we know for the past number of years, public safety has been a very significant issue in the city of Philadelphia. Right as we were going into the pandemic, I believe this is one of the last evening hearings that we had in City Council on February 11th at Christian Stronghold when Man Up PHL was just really getting started in drafting the resolution for the hearings at that time. We had 356 homicides in the city of Philadelphia, and that was a very alarming number at that time for 2019. We're now, as we all know, had 562 homicides last year, and as of this date, we're already looking at 120 homicides in the city of Philadelphia, already eclipsing last year's record at horrible pace. So having an opportunity to have this conversation about the work that Man Up PHL has done, Solomon Jones is the founder of this initiative, is board chair, Dr. Brian Ellis at Drexel University. Over the past year, take some of the work that they've done and really decided to really dig deep and really listen to the streets and talk to the young men who've been caught up in some of the challenges that we see that have caused the public safety conditions we have here in the city of Philadelphia. And so through listening to the streets, 8 themes came out of their report dealing issues with trauma, family influence, relationships, self-worth, communal limitations, communications, formal education, and real-time engagement. And having those conversations with the young men led to recommendations which are part of the report. And those recommendations are the following. Partner 10 incarcerated leaders with 10 community agencies to address gun violence from inside out. As well as, get to my notes, excuse me, I'm multitasking here. As well as number 2, create 300 jobs tailored to those who are most at risk for being involved in gun violence. Create a parallel educational experience for middle and high school students who are at high risk to be impacted by gun violence. Create mental health substations in communities heavily impacted by gun violence. Number 5, train and develop resource connectors to connect those engaged in gun violence with tangible resources and alternatives. So tonight we'll have an opportunity to talk with both the founders and all the partners of Man Up PHL, as well as those who've done the research, and really get a sense of what they gained from their conversations and listening to the streets with the young men who've been part of the challenges we see in our city. Hopefully, as we go into the budget process, we can use the information gleaned from tonight's conversations to make a more informed decision-making process as elected officials and leaders in our city as we look to solutions, as you said, Chairman Jones, to this problem in our city, so we do not eclipse 562 homicides in the city of Philadelphia, and we really move on the right path on making our city much safer going forward.
Thank you, Member Green. It is an imperative. We are already 3% above where we were last year, which was a record-setting year for homicides in our city. Are there any other members of the Public Safety Committee that would like to be recognized before we move to our first panel? Seeing none, Mr. Glass, would you please read the names of the first panel to testify? And for the record, each of the people to testify must state their name for the record so that the stenographer can get that and capture that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The first panel this evening will be Robert Crowder, Dr. Brian Ellis, B.G. Grays, and Solomon Jones.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Glass. Welcome to this public hearing. I don't know which order we will have you testify, but you should now unmute yourselves, and there you go. Solomon Jones, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Councilman. How are you?
Well, I could be better. I mean, you know, we're in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. I'm not feeling the love often, nor the affection based on the state of emergency that we find ourselves in, but I'm hoping for good news from your report. Please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
My name is Solomon Jones. I'm the Executive Director of Man Up PHL, and I want to thank the committee for having us this evening. I want to first, before I get into my written comments, extend my best wishes to Councilmember Gaudier, who I understand experienced gun violence close up in recent days. And we certainly wish you the best because that's always a traumatic experience. And so we're glad that you're here and in a position to do something about it. You're welcome. You're welcome. So maybe if we were under a different circumstance, I could celebrate the fact that Man Up PHL, the nonprofit that I began in November of 2019, had completed a study that puts forth 5 core solutions drawn from young men who've been touched by gun violence. But Philadelphia surpassed 500 murders last year, and we've already reached 120 this year. So rather than celebrate, I have to mourn. When someone in my city can repeatedly shoot a pregnant woman in the head and stomach, killing both mother and child, when someone can wrap a body in tarp and drop it in a Kensington lot, when we can watch murders on Instagram as if they're entertainment rather than crimes, we need solutions, and we need them now. The only way to get them is to understand the problem fully, and we can't do that unless we talk to young black men. Gun violence victims in Philly are 88% male and 85% black. Any conversation meant to stem the tide of gun violence in our city must include the voices of these young men, not only to save their lives, but also to save our own, because we can be caught in the crossfire too. That's why we started Man Up PHL, to steer young black men away from gun violence. Through our Listening to the Streets initiative, which offers mentoring, job opportunities, and stipends to participants, we embarked upon hours of conversation with young men who've been shot, faced gun charges, or lived in communities where gunfire is a regular occurrence. Written by Man Up PHL Board Chairman Brian Ellis, the resultant study is called Exploring the Lived Experiences of Black Males in Philadelphia Around Gun Violence and the Behaviors, Activities that Encourage Gun Culture. When we asked the men why gun violence persists, they talked about schools that don't prepare them for living wage jobs. They spoke of families split by mass incarceration. They bemoaned a lack of economic opportunity, and they spoke of a culture driven by social media arguments and punctuated by drill music, a murderous hip-hop soundtrack that celebrates and documents homicides. More than anything, though, they spoke of pain and the need to survive. Losing my cousins, family members, literally seeing their heads open, that changed me. That's what a 26-year-old participant from North Philly told us when we asked him how gun violence had affected him. I seen a whole lot of stuff, seems like. That made me be the way I am. It was like, it ain't gonna be me. Another 26-year-old participant from Frankfurt spoke of being shot by a friend on the same block where his father had been shot more than 2 decades before. The generational nature of the violence is not something that can be solved overnight. But when we asked the young men for solutions, they spoke of innovative approaches, and we listened. Based on their input, Man Up PHL made 5 central recommendations, and we're calling on different segments of our community to help carry them out. First, we call on local universities to partner with neighborhood schools, creating a new educational pipeline for students who are threatened by gun violence. Second, we call on the prison system to use incarcerated leaders to fight gun violence from inside the prison walls. Third, we call on medical schools to bring mental health substations to our communities. Fourth, we call on corporations to create jobs for returning citizens and government to give them tax credits for doing so. And fifth, we call on our sports industry to fund community members to work as resource connectors to steer young people to proven and effective help. That last recommendation was drawn from the words of a 21-year-old participant from South Philly who was facing gun charges when we spoke to him. He spoke passionately about the need to make real connections with those involved in gun violence. You can't just go build a bond with somebody who got a gun on the streets, he said. You got to already have that bond with him. He got to already be close to you, because it's hard to open up to people in the streets. It's hard to communicate. People in the streets got harder communication skills. You just got to know somebody in that community already trying to make a change. So if we're going to solve the gun violence in Philadelphia, we need to listen. Man Up PHL has helped to start that process, and now it's time to act.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I remember being in Christian Stronghold when we first heard of this initiative. Member Green was right by my side when we heard it, and we thought it was ambitious, and thought that, okay, you're taking on a colossal problem. But what I see is that through your report, you've sliced it into key areas that are a bit more digestible and at least maybe even manageable. So I'm encouraged by that. I'm going to yield the mic to allow Member Green to start with the first salvo of questions. And what we're going to do is something different than we normally do, which we usually wait for an entire panel. But I think it's that important that we get it while it's hot, if you would, and talk to Mr. Jones and then the other members of the committee, is if that's okay with the other participants of this committee. Hearing no objections, I recognize Member Green.
And Mr. Chair, I think I definitely like that suggestion. I would like to see if we could hear from Dr. Brian Ellis, who was the author of the report as well, because there's some questions I know that I have that I would like to ask both to Mr. Jones and also Dr. Ellis.
That makes sense, Member Green. Dr. Ellis, are you there?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm here. Hope you all can hear me well. Brian Ellis, President of Man Up PHL.
Good evening. State your name for the record again and proceed with your testimony, please.
Absolutely. Again, my name is Brian Ellis. I am the president for Man Up PHL. I'm also an educator here in the city. I have over 20 years of experience in higher education. And as Councilman Green alluded, I am the primary investigator for this study, exploring the lived experiences of Black males in Philadelphia around gun violence and the behaviors, activities that encourage gun culture. To that point, it was really important early on when Solomon and I had an initial conversation, other members of the board, and just the Man Up PHL family in general. We really want to come up with some really tangible solutions or recommendations. But to do that, we thought it was important to have data drive these decisions and these discussions. So that was the impetus behind, doing this this study. Really collecting the data. I'm a qualitative researcher, so I want to use the lived experiences of, to your point, Councilman Jones, many of the victims and perpetrators of said violence, and being able to hear from them in their words. Quite frankly, having been around for 40 plus years, a resident of Philadelphia, now living in South Jersey, but I still work in the city. This is a crisis, and we felt the need to do something. And again, I wanted to do something with Man Up PHL that was really somewhat different. And when I say different, I've worked with many nonprofits over the years. But here, I think the business model that we've developed, where we identify some very clear verticals, that's going to make this, I think, to your point, a lot more digestible, when we start making recommendations as we look towards solutions. And that's why I'm so excited to be part of Man Up PHL and this particular project on Listen to the Streets. Some of the information that came across throughout the study was eye-opening for me as an individual, as a father, as a husband, and again, being able to hear from these young men up close and personal in their lived experiences was really, really important. Some of the I'm looking at my notes here, and just looking at some of the comments that were shared during these focus group sessions. Somebody said, one of the young men said, "There ain't no therapy for what's going on in the streets." right? Councilman Green really shared with us those 8 themes that emerged from the study. And what we did was we utilized those themes to really develop the 5 recommendations that Councilman Green and Solomon Jones referenced earlier. So I'll stop there. I'm sure there's many questions, but again, honored to be here this evening and looking forward to the dialogue.
Okay, Member Green, do you want to start now, or would you like to hear the third panelist?
Well, I just wanted to get a perspective from Dr. Ellis following your lead. We can ask some questions now, because I know Councilman Gaudier has some questions. I know I have some questions, and then we have some other witnesses. So following your lead, maybe we'll ask a few questions now, then go back to the rest of the panel.
We're going to go with you, Member Green, and then Member Gaudier, and then we'll hear from the third panelist. Please proceed.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So to you, Mr. Jones, and also Dr. Ellis, thank you for your work and being here this evening and this initiative. One of the recommendations talks about creating 300 jobs for young men that are in this Listen to the Streets cohort that we talked about. How did you come up with the number 300? And I know currently Man Up PHL does provide stipends. I think it's $240 from my recollection, and I'm curious, how is that currently working within the organization? And who are some of the employers that you've been working with as well? Mr. Jones, I believe you're on mute.
My apologies. So the number 300 we thought was a manageable number. Brian and I worked together on the recommendations and really trying to come up with something that was realistic and could serve as a starting point. So the 300 is a starting point. And we thought that could be divided within the communities that are most heavily impacted by gun violence. We're asking for those 300 jobs specifically for people who are returning citizens, and we're asking for a living wage for them. I thought it was important for us not to depend completely on government to handle this problem. We thought that government could act as an initiator, that government could act as an encourager, and in the case of these 300 jobs, that government could provide tax credits that would allow for those corporations to provide those jobs and to reap some benefit from doing so. And so that is why we came up with the number 300 jobs, because we thought it could be a starting point, and you could take the data from whatever happened with those first 300 in order to expand it as needed. And so the second question you asked was about the stipends. We do pay to our participants, and those stipends are $15 an hour. We're cognizant of the fact that folks have been fighting for a long time to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and we felt like that was something that we should do as an example of what happens when you pay somebody $15 an hour. They come in to mentoring sessions where we do character, we do conflict resolution, we do trauma, we do job readiness, and we also do financial literacy. And in conjunction with that, we ask these questions around gun violence, the causes, the effects, and the solutions. And that's when we do a whole lot of listening. And that's where this report came from. And so the employers, you asked about what employers we work with. One of our board members is Jeff Brown, who is the owner of various ShopRites and Fresh Grocers in the city of Philadelphia and beyond. Another one of our partners is here. He is David Sims, the owner of Eatable Delights Catering. And we also work with Sandy Jan Cleaning. We work with Aramark when it's possible. We have a recruiter who comes in from the Sheet Metal Workers Union as well, and gives our guys opportunities to do that. We also are working on a partnership with Laz Parking. And so we work with numerous employers who give our guys opportunities when they finish our initiative. Brian, I don't know you wanted to add to any of that.
Yeah, no, I think, Solomon really hit the nail on the head. It's funny too. I mean, I get so excited when I talk to other members of the board. And in fact, we had a meeting recently. And, I think one thing that makes this Man Up PHL so unique and interesting is the way we've structured it, that business model. We talked about possibly expanding the list of employers. We talked about having like an external relations component to everything we do. So Solomon just ran down the list of current employers, but the ultimate goal is to expand that. We talked about that that $30,000, I think, is what we had in the report as far as the livable wage. Many would argue that may not even be enough, but again, it's a starting point for us, as Solomon alluded to.
And just to follow up on that, when you said some of the different people you're connecting with, when you said sheet metal workers, it made me think Reverend Robert Paul. When you talked about the jobs, are there other employers that you're looking to connect with? I know, and if I'm correct, former Councilmember Good actually did legislation for tax credits for hiring returning citizens. Need to see what's the current status of that legislation, how it's being used, and is that something that needs to be tweaked, be updated in order to help organizations like Man Up? But are there employers that you're looking to work with that have not had the opportunity to do so?
We would love to work with SEPTA. We would love to be able to work with the city of Philadelphia. One of the things that I would love to see us do is to create a model that is based around Ready, Willing, and Able. Ready, Willing, and Able is run by the Doe Fund out of New York, and they have crews of men cleaning all around the city. Our city has a problem with trash, and so I would like to see the city run its own program where we could bring in these men, start them at a living wage with benefits, with that city job that has that kind of job security, and they have some room to advance from that job. I would love to see something like that, because that, I think, would allow them to get their feet wet with working, and then build up the habits that they need in order to advance in an entity like the city of Philadelphia, where there are so many opportunities that one is bound to fit.
Has there been any conversations with other groups, like, for example, I know the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative, which provides training opportunities and job connections, as well as the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce has also been talking about working in this space as well?
We have not had conversations with them, but we would love to have those conversations. If someone on this panel, someone on this committee, like yourself, could help to facilitate those conversations, we'd love to have them.
Okay. I have some other questions, but I know Councilman Gaudier has questions, and I believe Councilman Brooks is also here, so I will defer to other members of council.
Thank you, Member Green, and we're on to a good start. I'm fascinated to know where you get these 300 individuals from. How did you select them? And then I'm going to listen to that and go right to Member Gaudier. Okay,
so we have not selected the 300 individuals yet, but we have, because this report was released several months ago. And so we have already embarked on a relationship with the Philadelphia prisons, and have had substantive conversations with Commissioner Blanche Carney and her staff about A, coming into the prison with our initiative, and B, working with people who have been released from the Philadelphia prisons with this initiative. And so we expect that we will be able to get those individuals from the Philadelphia prison system.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Member Gaudier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank Solomon and Brian and the whole Man Up PHL team for your work, but also for the disciplined way in which you've studied and tracked your work. It's so incredibly valuable to us. I'll say, if you would like a connection with West Philadelphia Skills Initiative, I'm happy to make that connection. They have a great workforce development program that's plugged into all of the major institutions in West and Southwest Philadelphia, but even more broadly to other job opportunities.
Excellent.
I wanted to let you know that something like the job program that you're talking about already exists, at least in idea form, in the Commerce Department. So the Commerce Department has envisioned for a while a job program, I believe it's called Good Quality Jobs, where they will give forgivable loans to small business owners who hire returning citizens. And so for the loan to be forgivable and turn into a grant, they have to hire returning citizens. This was a program that Commerce wanted to start before the pandemic, but kind of the world went haywire, but they've been trying to, they plan to implement this pretty soon. The other thing I wanted to say is that in the budget deal that Council struck last year, we allocated $5.6 million. We struck a deal with the administration where we added $70 million new dollars for gun violence prevention and intervention. A part of that 70 was $5.6 million allocated to Commerce specifically for job programs for those most likely to shoot and be shot. Mm-hmm. I'm learning a little bit about budget, right? Council allocates the money and then we don't have control necessarily over how it's spent. So I've asked many, many times the administration, what are we doing with that money? Where is that $5.6 million going to? And can you show us the job programs that will, benefit, those most likely to be involved in a cycle of violence? I never got a complete answer. I do know that they're hiring a position, a workforce development position to specifically focus on violence prevention. I do know that they're using a portion of that $5.6 million to fund this Good Quality Jobs program that they've been intending to get off of the ground for some time. So my suggestions would be, one, for this committee to approach the Commerce Department as a whole to ask for an accounting of that $5.6 million and also to ask for an update on the Good Quality Jobs program, but also for Man Up PHL to have a conversation with Commerce. And I'm sure any one of us would be willing to make that connection. Beyond kind of telling you about those job resources, I wanted to hear more about both the education part of your platform and sort of the part where you have folks in prison that are intervening to help stop violence on the streets. I just want to hear you explain more about what the education curriculum would be for students that have kind of witnessed or experienced violence. And then I wanted to hear you talk about more this sort of in the prisons piece and how you came up with that and what it would look like. Okay. And those are my questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Solomon, I can jump on the education piece. That's really my my wheelhouse. Again, I've had over 20 years of experience in higher education, and I don't think it would surprise anyone. We know there's some challenges with the Philadelphia public school system, and even from some of the respondents of the study, they illustrated some of those challenges within the school system. So the thought here was to kind of create this parallel educational experience for these students currently in the Philadelphia school system. I would argue that these students are coming out very not prepared for life, no matter where that takes them. We talk about those who want to go into higher education. Maybe some would want to go into the military, vocations, career readiness. It's just not happening the way that we're currently structured within public schools here in Philadelphia. Having said that, being at a university for so long, I've been able to identify some skills and competencies that we believe will help our young people be successful no matter what path they decide to take. Some of the thought behind, what does that programming look like, include things of power skills. how cool would it be to develop a power skill module for these students? We used to call these soft skills, but now they're power skills because they're that important. Think about teaching our kids how to communicate, how to present, how to think critically. So that would be like one module that we would ask these participants to be able to participate in and complete. And the nice thing about that is once they finish that particular module, they would receive some type of micro credential. I'll use Drexel because that's where I am, where, students are certified in power skills. They have a certificate or electronic badge to be able to go to any employer or anything they decide to do upon completion to say, hey, look what I have. This makes me more attractive as a candidate for a job or whatever the case may be. So the 4 areas that I've been working on explicitly would be power skills would be one area. Another module would be introduction to technology. Again, not teaching young people how to be computer programmers, but making sure they're literate as far as it relates to computer and computer literacy. That's another area. One that is extremely important is career readiness. So many young people, don't know how to develop or create a resume that would be attractive to prospective employers. How about being able to network via LinkedIn? These are things in these modules that we could help, teach these students how to do, again, to prepare them for life post high school graduation. And then lastly, another module that we're working on is personal wellness and health and mental health. We know that's extremely important. It came out as one of the themes in the study. And just to make sure folks are prepared, young people are prepared to enter, the rigors of being adulthood and being able to fully comprehend some of the expectations that come along with that. So that was really the ideal behind the parallel educational expense, being able to work with these high schools to kind of create these explicit modules for students. And there could be more. These are the 4 that just come to mind as we speak here, but there could be other opportunities. But that relationship, I think, is going to be critical to prepare our young folks for life post high school graduation.
Yeah. One of the things that we wanted to do in crafting these ideas was to really be very explicit in terms of the ask. And so what we ask is that 500 students who hail from the zip codes most affected by gun violence be part of a partnership between the Philadelphia School District and each Philadelphia area university. So this would not be all on Drexel. We would be calling on Temple. We would be calling on LaSalle. We'd be calling on Drexel. We'd be calling on St. Joe's and any other university within or outside of the city of Philadelphia that wanted to be part of this. And what we would do is this: have the child spend half the time in their neighborhood school and then half the day at the university. They receive high school and college credit for their coursework, points toward their admission to the university upon completing high school. The operational funding would total about $1,000 per child. That could be provided by foundations or corporate sponsors or by the city. Because again, universities have classroom space and classes that they're already holding where they don't have to charge this child for taking this class. You're already holding the class. You already got the space. You're already heating it. You already have the energy. Everything is paid for. All you got to do is bring the child in. So again, $1,000 per child would be a $500,000 investment that could be paid for by foundations, corporate sponsors, or city government if city government chose to do that.
Not to mention, Solomon, exposure for these students as well. To have that type of experience on these college campuses, that's huge.
So if I could, I in another lifetime had a youth summer training program. And basically we exposed people to, you call it power skills, I called it soft skills back in my day. And one of the most interesting things that happened was that there's a saying that you should plant trees that you may never experience the shade of. Meaning that if you work with people to develop them, you may never see the end game outcome that you're looking for, but it only to hope that it exists. Well, for me, back in the PCDC days, Solomon may be old enough to remember that agency. We did summer intense entrepreneurial training. 2 things that I'll quickly say. One, I was in East Falls walking at a community festival, and a lady started following me down the street, and I got uncomfortable, and I began to turn around and say, "Hey, how you doing?" and engage her. Come to find out, she was a participant. So I asked her, how'd you like it? She loved it. And I said, "Did you stay in business?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Were you successful?" She said, "Yes." And I stopped and paused. "Did you make $1 million? Are you a millionaire?" She said, "Yes." So when you expose a young person to an environment, and they may not all be millionaires, but they may be thousandaires that wind up in a workplace and retire from a job and never ever have to experience that prison system again just by those power skills that you're talking about. I have not seen a physical, actual paper application to a job in years. So if you don't have those power skills to be able to log on and apply, you may never get a chance to get a job or be through an algorithm bumped out because of some box you didn't check.
Yeah.
So these things are very important so that they can at least get a fighting chance to be in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The other question that Councilwoman Gaudier asked was about the prison aspect of this, and each one of these is again based on what these young men told us, and so this is the first of the 5 recommendations that we make, and I just want to read what the young man said to us. He's a 26-year-old participant from North Philadelphia, and he said this: "If it was my program, I would talk to convicted felons who got gun cases, violent cases, shootings, murders. I want to talk to them first, so that way I could see if I could get them on page to help me talk to the other ones. They're the ones that got life and stuff like that, and football numbers and all of that. Who else they going to listen to than the person that's next in line? I'm saying we should do more." So in other words, what he realized and what he articulated is that there are leaders within the prison system who are leading other guys either astray or leading them to not come back, right? And that we should tap into that leadership of persons who other people respect and will listen to around that. If we can get them, then we can get them to be our ambassadors to get others, right? And so that was the first thing that we approached the prison with. Could we come in and talk to some of the people? We need you to identify for us 10 leaders within your prison who we could come in and engage with, and then see if they can act as our ambassadors to engage with others. And this is an idea we probably would have never come up with ourselves, but this is based on what these young men told us. They talked about the prisons over and over and over again, talked about the generational nature of it, talked about a kid who went to prison and that's the only time he got to talk to his father because they both were there at the same time. You know, that kind of stuff. And so that was the initial thing, was to go in, work inside the prison, work with leaders there who could then convince others to join with us in this effort. That has morphed into getting guys to come out of the prison and then connecting them with our mentors, with our initiative, and with employment. And so we're looking at it.
Yeah, I think he's frozen.
Am I?
Maybe. Yeah. Oh no, we hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, you froze for a second, Solomon, but you're back.
Okay. Well, hopefully you got the gist of what I said.
Member Gaudier, are you done?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Member Brooks. Member
I just
Brooks?
wanted to acknowledge that I was present.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Well, we duly noted. Member Green?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jones, as you were talking about this other plank of incarcerating leaders with 10 community agencies, I was having this exact same conversation with Jean Lamar Stewart from District Attorney's Office, who's looking at trying to do a pilot initiative, with his church, and the idea of having that same, and exactly what you're saying, of the same conversations he's had as part of GBI and talking with young men who are in the streets and having that opportunity, that connection, because there are fathers, other adults who are away that want to do this. They want to have this type of connection with their children, with their relatives, and want to provide some type of positive influence and connection while they are away. And I think this is something that we've had in the past. I know former State Representative Ron Waters used to have a Lifers event on a regular basis. I think bringing that type of concept back, and I think there are a couple of different organizations who are trying to do something similar. So I think it's an opportunity for collaboration and finding ways to make this happen in a real way, which I think is important. Another question I had regarding mental health, which is a major issue, especially in our community, especially in the African American community in particular, that we don't often talk about. Because I am very, very involved in this community by having a child on the autism spectrum. I have a lot of conversations with Department of Behavioral Health, Intellectual Disability Services, and CBH. There's an organization, the Coalition of Culturally Competent Providers, which are a group of mental health, behavioral health providers that are led by African American leaders. I think they would be a good group or resource to maybe connect with you and get some ideas on mental health, especially in the cohort of young men you're talking about, because my calls with them, they've had some real concerns about what the pandemic has done to many people that have had services or need services, and the inability to connect because of the pandemic, and have had to rely on telehealth to the extent that they do have those services. And then one other point I wanted to ask this question. Yesterday, Councilmember Jones, myself, and Gautier were at a press conference for the new 211 line, which is and you talked about resource connectors. I want to make sure that what you're talking about is similar to the conversation we had yesterday. In fact, Council President Clark talked about there were some young men that had their house shot up, and it was some community leaders, some of the names that we know, reached out to Council President and said, listen, we've got some guys who are here right now that want to get out this game, get out this life. Who do we connect them with? And trying to figure out who we make that connection to. And I think when the Council President talked about 211, being able to do that right now, right then, present time, not trying to find someone, make a referral, but immediately be able to call someone that we can get on the phone that could steer them into that path. So when you talk about resource connectors, I want to get a sense, is that the type of thing you're talking about, or are there other ideas?
So again, I want to let you know what the young man said that made us frame this idea in the way that we did. He said, you can't just go build a bond with somebody who got a gun on the street. You got to already have that bond with them. He got to already be close with you, because it's hard to open up with people on the street. It's hard to communicate. People in the street got harder communication skills. You just got to know somebody in that community already trying to make a change. The thing that we found was that there is a lack of trust of systems that are set up to actually assist people, right? We asked them about the idea of a line that people could call to squash beefs, right? You call this line, somebody gonna come out, they're gonna help you squash your beef. They said, man, we ain't calling that. That's snitching. We don't know who's on the other end of that line. That's what they said. And so, we come up with these ideas and they sound great, but when you talk to the people who would actually have to utilize it, they wouldn't do it. And for very practical reasons. And so the idea of having these resource connectors is having people who are trusted in the community, who have a list of these resources, who could then recommend people who need these resources to use them. right? Make the connection for them. You have to have somebody as a go-between who's trusted in the community and who's connected to the needed resource in order for people to actually utilize it. They're not going to call a line when they don't know who's on the other end. They're not going to go to folks who they don't know because it's a matter of life and death for them. And so the idea of having someone who could connect them to that resource, that's where that comes from. Brian, you might want to speak more to it based on some of those 8 themes that we had.
Yeah, it really speaks, not only the resource connector recommendation, but even the one where we, I know Councilman Green started with the mental health, and we talked about the mental health substations. And again, this all goes back to that theme that emerged was real-time engagement, needing to meet these young men where they are. Solomon just alluded to it. That's snitching. We ain't doing that, but if we can kind of, get within the community and people that they trust within their community, bring these substations in the community and work with people already embedded that have a sense of standing in the community, I think it's a game changer. And again, that was the idea behind those recommendations. So Solomon, you nailed it.
Yeah.
So we are going to take a pause on this engagement and allow the third panelist to testify, and then we'll re-engage on some of the questions and answers that we are hearing and putting on the record today.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Madam.
I don't know if you saw, I have a point of information. Did you want me to wait or?
No, I think you should engage now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I just wanted to say that we have a functioning program, right, that we can build upon. So currently in the city, we have CCIP, or the Community Crisis Intervention Program, where we have violence interrupters or outreach workers that are folks, with lived experience from the communities that they're serving, that are supposed to be in these neighborhoods on a daily basis. They are supposed to be connecting with young people, connecting them to resources, and also they aim to be that trusted partner that can get between beefs before they turn into violence. I would say, I think we need to dramatically expand that program. We have 54 people currently doing that work. We had 562 homicides in 2022. 54 people that's not enough people, right? So we need to dramatically expand the number of people that we're supporting and paying to do that work. I also think that it should be more decentralized. So right now, most of that work happens through PAN, or the Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence Network. I think, and they operate out of a location, I think on Broad Street, but it would be great to have sort of these substations in the various communities that are experiencing violence. And the other kind of way that I think we should be looking to build upon that program is by making sure that there are real resources on the other end. I think that, right now the PAN folks, they're doing the best they can. They're doing hard work. They're doing dangerous work. But a lot of times they're going into neighborhoods. They're handing out flyers about jobs, and about different resources that the city offers. I think we need to beef up the amount of resources that they can actually connect people to, and the immediacy with which they can connect people to resources. Because if you're going into a neighborhood and asking a young person not to engage in violence, you have to have something on the other end for them to trust you, I think. And so I just wanted to say that this point really resonates with me, and I think that we have an existing city program that we can really bolster and expand to achieve what Man Up PHL is recommending.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to add one thing very quickly, that we asked the sports teams to put up $1 million collectively to pay for 30 resource connectors who will assist young people seeking to leave gun violence behind. And they should come from the communities that they are going to serve. They shouldn't be just people that we've, picked from, say, West Philly, and then we're going to send them into South Philly. Philadelphia is a very provincial city. We need to have people from the communities that they are going to serve to go into those communities and serve people who know them. And it goes back to what that young man said, that there has to be somebody that we actually know and trust, not just because we share the same experience, but because we know them, in order to have them, really be effective at doing that. And I appreciate the councilwoman's point about the program that's already in place and the need to expand it.
And, if I could just jump in quickly too, I'm sorry, but, I talked early on about the business model that, Man Up PHL has incorporated. And I think that's so critical because, again, these programs, there needs to be evaluation, accountability, and assessment. And, a lot of the recommendations that we make, that's the plan, that's the goal, to make sure that, we hold the appropriate folks accountable and we can assess our success and our failure. So if we need to pivot, we can and we will. So I'll leave it at that.
We are one thing before we go to our third panelist, because we're an hour in, because this is needed dialogue, needed conversation. The Philadelphia sports teams, and help me out with this, Member Green, negotiated by Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown, negotiated about $1 million a year to go to youth programs. That was way back in the day, but I don't know what the current use of those dollars are. So we might want to make that connection to come back and revisit that and see if there is an existing fund, how's it being utilized, who is taking advantage of it, and if it's underutilized, then we can make a connection very quickly to find good use for those dollars. So, I mean, what this conversation is doing is showing where the connect the dots need to happen. As Member Gaudier said, if the Commerce Department has an employment program, then it's on us to introduce peanut butter to jelly and say, all right, let's make some bread. And so let's try to connect those dots as we do this to see what exists, to make what is necessary for the solutions. Okay, Mr. Glad.
Mr. Chair, real quick. Yes. I know that there is an ongoing relationship with some of the sports teams. For example, just this weekend, Parks and Recreation hosted a Philadelphia Youth Football Summit with youth football coaches at Lincoln Financial Field with the Eagles. So and I'm sure there are other initiatives that other parts of the city government is having with sports teams. Just a matter of finding out what's happening with those resources that you just talked about.
Yeah, I think sports teams are comfortable with the portion of the youth population that's already on a trajectory to make it out of here. We have to reach back a bit and find resources for the at-risk kids. And so it can't just be Pop Warner. It has to be a little more risque, if you would. So, all right, Mr. Glass, who's next?
Mr. Chairman, there's two other members of this panel, Robert Crowder and B.G. Grays.
Mr. Crowder, Mr. Grays, can you please unmute yourselves?
Good evening. This is Robert Crowder speaking.
How are you, Mr. Crowder? Please begin your testimony.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank the members of City Council for allowing me to share my experience with Man Up PHL as a mentor. What I have here is a reoccurring theme when I interview my mentees, and a few of them, one is children feel like they were basically thrown away. And I say children, but they're young men. And this is from one of my mentees, and I'm quoting, I never really knew my mother. She basically abandoned me and left me with my grandmother at a young age. And I never had an experience with my father because he was in and out of jail most of my life. So as a result, I've been living with my grandmother and got in trouble and basically developed some bad habits that keep getting me in trouble. He's currently under pretrial arrest for aggravated assault and possession of a weapon. And this young man also admitted that he is on a medication for like anxiety and also for his anger management. So that's just a few of the reoccurring themes that I experience when I speak to the mentees, and these are guys who want to do well, but they've developed some bad habits. Basically, similar to a musician that's self-taught. He basically does what it takes to do what he does. It sounds good to him, but it creates a problem on and off in his life. And the other is housing. This young man is basically depending on a friend to allow him to stay with him at the moment because he's not with his grandmother. And this is just one guy, but he's dependent on a friend to allow him to stay there. And he's with a girlfriend who also has mental health issues. So this is something that's constantly reoccurring in the interviews that I do with some of these guys. And it's unfortunate, but I'm going to keep it real brief so that someone else can speak. Just an observation, not a professional one, of course, but this problem is an onion, and it requires layers of solutions. Man Up PHL is one, City Council is one, education, and all the things that Solomon Jones mentioned. And I'm happy to be involved, but it's unfortunate that it's necessary. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Glass, who else do we have?
B.G. Grace is the last speaker from this panel.
Mr. Grace, are you there?
I am. Good evening.
Good evening. State your name for the record and please begin your testimony.
I turn my camera on. I'm B.G. Grace. I am a member of the movement, Man Up PHL. I wear several different hats within our organization. I am a mentor. As a mentor, part of my responsibilities is guiding these young men through some of the issues that they're going through. Criminal justice system, family issues, getting them ready for employment, showing them how to get employment and keep employment, teaching them ways on how they can resolve disputes, and also we connect them with resources. I'm also the mentor coordinator. As the mentor coordinator, I also recruit additional volunteers to come in and to also provide the same type of care and services. I was also part of the research project as one of the facilitators as well. What stood out to me most from being one of the facilitators is that most of the young men, they don't have any hope. They don't, and that's a problem. So many things are going on in their life. Pretty much, they just giving up. They're just going with whatever is happening to them. For instance, we often ask them questions like, what does success look like for you? What would you like your life to be like? And they can't answer. They're stunned. They're like, what do you mean? How do you know you'll be successful? Some basic questions, and they just can't answer it. They lack hope. So what we do at Man Up, we expose them to different things. We expose them to different occupations. We let them know that where they're at right now is not going to be, that's where they're not going to be at forever. All they have to do is have some hope, put in a little bit of time, work with different individuals, work with the organizations that's out there, accept the resources that we're providing, open up, and start to trust a little bit. Because like we stated before, the young men, they do not trust anybody. They look at us like, how could you guys have let this happen to us? That's how they look at us. They're like, we've gone through all this stuff. You guys came before us. Now you in here telling us all these things. You guys let this stuff happen to us. So I'm asking City Council that, of course, you guys support us in our findings and help us to facilitate the things that we're trying to do for these young men in the community. If anyone has any questions for me.
Yeah, a million of them. And so is there a common denominator among these young people? Stereotypically, is it a single parent household? What are some of the common denominator factors in your mentees' lives?
There's a lot, but let's start with education. The young men will tell you that when they were in elementary school, before they came off the steps, let's go with that term, everything was okay. They loved life. They loved their friends. They loved their family. They were oblivious to real life. Once they transitioned from elementary school to going to high school, everything changed. They send them to schools outside their neighborhood where there has been beefs and arguments and problems going on for decades, and they weren't prepared for it. They used to come to school to want to learn. Now they go to school, just to fight and, to not be harmed. So there's no way for them to learn when they get to school, because they fight on their way to school, they fight when they're in school, and they fight when they're leaving. And then the only thing that happens to them is they get in trouble. They may not have started out that way, but the circumstances and the situation that we put them in causes that.
So, poverty levels, income levels in the household. So are we at that 26% poverty rate, most of them?
Probably, yes, definitely. Some of the guys we have that come through, they don't even have anywhere to live. And it's a struggle for them to get to us. So we try to do everything we can, to help them secure housing, transportation. We provide them with transportation, try to give them key cards to get to them, however we got to do it. They can't even make it to the first session. So we'll have someone go out there and meet them wherever they are just to get them there. So absolutely, they're living below the poverty level. They have no income coming in.
So by way of role models, people that they would look up to, is it, quote, the old head on the corner? Is it the street legend that came home from prison? Or are there coaches? Are there male role models that might be that guiding light?
Okay, so here's what I learned from listening to the streets. The teenagers run everything. They consider the 21 and 22-year-olds old heads. And the 35-year-olds and up, they are no factors. They don't even consider them anymore. So you have the 21-year-olds, that's pretty much what they call the OGs. And it's the teenagers, they follow after them. One of the mentees told us that they realized that the old heads, the 21-year-olds, are really just using them as the term was, test crash dummies.
I heard that term.
But once they're able to make it past 17, 18, 19, then they realize that they were being used, and they turn on the old heads for using them. So that's one cause of beef that we have going on. So when we expose them to different type of men when they come to Man Up, we have a whole variety of different individuals, from laborers, judges, doctors, everyday working gentlemen, everybody, social workers. So we expose them to that, but we also let them know, our past, that we've had some rough ways. We didn't come through some things as well. So we let them know that, and we let them know that where you are right now is not where you have to be in the future. So we impart it for them to try to come up with some realistic goals, and we help support them so they can accomplish their goals.
Member Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for your testimony. I guess the question I have, and I was listening to you, and I've heard, and I think Councilmember Jones also familiar with that phrase, crash test dummies. When they turn on their OGs, what does that look like? And then what do they do once they become OGs themselves with that next generation below them? And I'm curious on if you've seen those dynamics as well.
Yes. They don't really think about it. All they know is that they've been wronged. Mm-hmm. So they've been wronged. They've been taught the bad ways of the streets. They had them doing things for them. So now you are what they call, you're my ops now. Mm-hmm. So now that's a problem. So not only whatever issues they're already into, now they have new issues because they found out someone that they was looking up to was really just using them.
And so when they come to that type of realization, because they're now a little bit older, is there a pivot moment like, okay, now I don't need to go in this path?
No.
Okay.
No, not unless there's some type of interruption in what they're doing. So again, Man Up and other organizations or just individuals, they can step in and catch them right then and there. Then they can pivot. But other than that, no, they follow the ways of the streets that's been laid out there before them.
And they themselves will become the OGs and then use the next group underneath them as crash test dummies as they have been used themselves.
Way the streets.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we have a daunting test. Once again, I go back to the subsets that you created, not only identifying the problem, but potential solutions. We have to find, I feel stunned by that kind of almost factory-like creation of at-risk people. That there is a hierarchy that turns on itself and cannibalizes itself and its young people. And what's worse is I see it, but I didn't understand the depth to which it is synchronized. I guess that's the word. So thank you for your testimony. Thank you.
And Councilmember Jones, if I could just make, as I was listening, it's modeling other institutions. When you think about the sense that when someone comes into military as a private, or they come into different organizations, there's certain things that are done to you in order for you to get to the next level. And then when you get to that next level, you do some of those same things to the group that comes in below you. So it's modeled what we've seen in other organizations in a street culture, which is unfortunate because now you're doing that. You're seeing that the same modeling happening for young people who are in a street culture, and then they are emulating other dynamics and other types of systems, but doing it within a street culture system.
See, I don't want to be the old guy in the discussion, but back in my day, we had those same structures. We had old heads, we had juniors, we had peewees, we had young boys, we had all of that. But it was designed not to cannibalize. It was designed to what they called make you thorough. I mean, and all of these are not positive models, but there was a lot that I took out of that experience that I carry with me today. Like, that wasn't all bad. What they're telling me is it's devolved, disintegrated into something very different. So, Mr. Glass, who do we have next?
Mr. Chairman, our second panel will be Cheryl McFadden and David Sims.
Welcome, Ms. McFadden and Mr. Sims. Are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Ms. McFadden, thank you for your patience. You know, we can be long-winded, but thank you for hanging in there with us.
Okay.
State your name for the record and please begin your testimony.
My name is Cheryl McFadden. I am a lifelong resident of Philadelphia, and I am also an educator in the Philadelphia school system. I've spent half of my career in the Office of Career Technical Education, and I'm currently at Randolph Career and Technical High School. Yes, thank you, Councilman. We have been benefactors of your kindness. I have felt the pain and anxiety and trauma from the ongoing violence, personally and professionally. When I was growing up in Nicetown, gun violence was a rare occasion, but it has woven itself into the fabric of life into our city, and this is not okay. I began volunteering with Man Up in March of 2020, shortly after we were shuttered by the pandemic, and I had no idea how I could help but my experience as a classroom teacher and educator, and coupled with the great team of volunteers, allowed us to pivot our support online and then plan for the future. Fast forward to April of 2021 when Listening to the Streets was born. We had no money, but we had plans, and we were able to fund the cohorts for the remainder of the year. And once the city opened, we knew that we had to go in person, and so we did. But we also knew that we needed to provide these young men with more than a t-shirt, a meal, and an encouraging word. We knew they needed the inner healing as well. They needed job connections. They needed the soft skills. They needed to learn how to negotiate and manage themselves. But they, most importantly, they needed someone to show up and let them know that things were going to be all right. Not just tell them, but show them how things would be okay. So for me, Man Up became an action verb. It wasn't just another organization that I belonged to. It wasn't a proper noun, right? So over the past 2 years, we have worked effortlessly and tirelessly to make sure that every cohort was funded, to make sure that we had people who were on standby who could provide these young men with the resources and connections they needed. But we continue to have the gun violence. And so eventually I hope that the city and the school district will hear the cries of the young men. I have bore witness to everything they said in that report about the high schools. Because I'm a high school teacher. I teach 9th grade and have done so for 13 years. So it becomes important as SDP continues to implement the goals and guardrails, that they will implement guardrails to protect our young black men who felt disconnected and disrespected and not heard in their classrooms, and restore the much needed CTE programs, give them the computer literacy skills that they once used to get, and allow programs like Man Up to continue to mentor to these young men. Man Up is doing the work to help these young men heal, recover, and repair from their past, and work toward being the change. And these young men want to see in the streets, but most importantly in themselves. I've had the pleasure of meeting some mentees, and it just delighted my heart. And I say that it might sound corny, but it really did when the young men would tell me what their dreams were, and and their plans for the future. And just to have, and I think it's important when people listen to you and people believe you, just like you're nodding your head, Councilman Jones, that goes a long way for these young men, because you're listening and you're affirming my words. And that's what Man Up is doing for these young men. We're listening, affirming, and showing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Who do we have next, Mr. Glass?
David Sims.
David Sims. How are you, sir? You're on mute.
I'm David Sims. I'm the artist and proprietor of Eatable Delights Catering. And thank you for having me this evening. Thank you, Councilman Jones. Thank you, Councilman Green, and all the other council people that's online, as well as Solomon Jones. I am one of the employers that Solomon asked me to give some of the gentlemen an opportunity. And while I've worked with reentry citizens in the past, for me, it was pretty easy to tell Solomon yes. Once I got some of these gentlemen here employed with me, I can attest to some of the things that have been talked about as far as the mental abuse and the physical abuse and all the things that some of these young men have gone through. but I understand that they have challenges, and I'm willing as an employer to put in the work. Not just because these are young African American men, but because somebody gave me a chance. Me being here in business now in the city of Philadelphia for about 25 years, I'm excited and happy to help anyone that, needs an opportunity. What I found from working with reentry citizens is that a lot of times they just need an opportunity. They need a chance. They need somebody to talk to them. They need somebody that will be able to understand that they have some challenges, such as not having a phone, or not having a meal, or not having some of the basic essential things, as the gentleman talked about earlier, such as housing. I understand that they may not be able to get through to the next week. I understand that they may need car fare, or they may need a trans pass, or they may need some other things that just will require them to remain employed. I always tell the gentleman, and not just the returning citizens, and not just the people from Solomon Jones program, because I do work with 2 other programs as well. Just give me a year. Just give me a year to be able to sow into you, to be able to put something into you, and to be able to help you turn your life around. I had a gentleman in 2012 come work for me that had some serious challenges. I believe at that particular time he was a sexual offender or something like that. And I just asked him 3 questions. Can you get to work on time? Can you be molded? And I forgot what the 3rd question was at that time. The gentleman stayed with me for 5 years, and now he's running his own catering business. So we've got to pour and sow into people and be able to give back to these young men. And I'm going to reference Kevin Parker. I remember when I was in my struggling days back in the early 2000s, and my phone was off. And he told me to come down South Street, and he said, don't ever let your phone be off again. And he put 2 $100 bills in my hand. And he said, keep your phone on. But the lesson that I learned from him is when we sow seeds, when we go to harvest, so do they. So it's my job. It's my job to help some of these young men and give them opportunities and give them chances. And I'm delighted to do so.
I've had an opportunity to see some of your proteges do their thing by way of being servers at events, at banquets and things like that. And you would think, were born to it and were polite, knowledgeable about the food, and always open to be helpful. And I appreciate that cultivation that you do. So thank you.
You're welcome. Training is key, necessary, and essential.
So the people up at Randolph are so. Member Green was nice enough to, at 7 a.m. on Monday, join us in a roll call session. And what that is all of my high school and middle schools, we get together at 7 a.m. to talk about the state of affairs in the respective schools and what can be done to prevent violence in the upcoming week. So what we're supposed to talk about is just who was fighting who, what beefs were between schools, but it turned into something far deeper, and it reminds me of what I'm hearing today, Member Green, and that's why I bring it up. Some of the deep pain that some of our educators feel on behalf of the students they serve. And we talk about the theory that is 2 book bags. One with the books for the lessons of the day, and the other book bag full of the problems from home. And Member Green was able to hear some of that venting that was going on, and some of the dysfunctionality within the households that are sending our kids to school. And so it reminds me of what Man Up is discovering in that onion layer peeling that is a deep problem within our community.
And Mr. Chair, I would agree with you in that regard. It's definitely a challenge. I think some of the educators and others you had on your call are deeply concerned about some of the same things we're talking about this evening. I applaud Ms. McFadden as an educator. As the son of an educator, I often say I'm a TK, teacher's kid, because I know the type of hours and time that educators put in, having a mother who taught in the school district for 31 years, 26 years at Olney High School. So to provide that type of work commitment during the day, but then also partnering and participating in Man Up PHL, I want to applaud you for your work and staying committed and involved and continuing to educate and mentor young people even after the school bell rings. And to David Sims, known David for a long time. I've always been very supportive. I've seen how his business has grown from the early days to where he is now, being in multiple cities around the country, but always devoted and committed to giving back to those who need a leg up for the next opportunity. So I want to thank him for also not only being on this hearing call, but also being an employer with Man Up PHL.
Thank you, Member Green. Mr. Glass, who do we have next?
Mr. Chairman, that was supposed to be our last speaker. Is there anyone else here to testify on the resolution whose name has not yet been called?
Hearing none. Do you have any closing comments, Member Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank all of the participants from Man Up PHL for sharing their experiences, their conversations, and really giving us some insight on the lived experiences of the young men that they work with. I know from this call there are some additional takeaways that I think will be helpful to Man Up PHL. I know Councilman Gaultier talked about connecting the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative with Man Up PHL, also the conversations regarding the Commerce Department and their dollars for jobs and the Good Quality Jobs Initiative, as well as making some other connections like the Coalition of Culturally Competent Providers to help address some of the mental health issues. And then also as we look at some of the job opportunities and look at some of the other organizations that provide that, we need to also think in a holistic way. One of the initiatives that we know we've been seeing this conversation regarding life sciences and how life sciences will really provide some opportunities for the city of Philadelphia, and we can be a real leader globally in reference to life sciences. But that's an opportunity that we hear about for those who are coming out of Penn or St. Joe's, LaSalle, Drexel, or some of the other phenomenal college and university we have here in the city of Philadelphia. But what about someone that is living near Broad and Glenwood or Kingsessing, Washington Lane, or Washington Avenue? What are we doing to provide that type of job pipeline for young people who, as Tom Jones talked about, who were going one way, and as I think Mr. Crowder said, we need an interruption to change that direction. So I think using that example of how we are connecting with providing those opportunities, either through connecting with Community College Philadelphia, helping some of the people we're talking about get some of those skills plus training, so that way they may not be able to get into a lab because they don't have a college degree, but could be into some of those ancillary jobs that will be created through this growing life science industry that may expose them to what it would like to be in a lab. And so they are providing that type of pipeline. And I think considering the work that HRP is doing in Southwest Philadelphia, we have some time to develop that pipeline. So we've got to create the jobs now, which are needed, but also we need to create those real pipelines between people coming from out of the school district, from our neighborhood schools, so they can get jobs, high-paying career opportunity jobs that will also expose them to maybe even future careers where they could go to a CCP or further education at a collegiate level to give them additional opportunities. But we need to have those conversations now and find ways that we can have everyone to participate in these new industries and opportunities in our city.
Thank you, Member Green. And thank you to all of those who testified today. Any other remarks from members of the Public Safety Committee? Seeing none, Frederick Douglass said, "It is better to build strong youth than to fix broken men." And we need to take that lesson with us to the budget process, Member Green, and the lessons from the PHL Man Up report, and put our money where our mouth is to build these programs up to scale so they can impact more people. And with that, this concludes the public hearing of on resolution number 200052. Thank you all for participation.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good night. Thanks.
Thank you.